After 25 years behind the decks, I've learned that every DJ has a unique path. I'm DJ Deckard. Welcome to A DJ's Journey, a podcast that explores the stories behind the music with the DJs who shaped our scene. Today I'm joined by Austin Harvey of the Freestylers, one of the key figures in UK breakbeat, known for helping shape the sound of big beat and genre-blurring dance music in the late 90s and beyond. Welcome to A DJ's Journey, where every beat tells a story. Welcome to A DJ's Journey. I'm your host, Deckard. Today, I am very pleased to have on one of the defining voices of big beat and breakbeat era, Austin Harvey of the Freestylers. He and co-founder Matt Cantor fused hip-hop and breakbeat into one of the greatest albums of that or any other era with We Rock Hard in the late 90s, an album I still play to this day, full of bangers. Not content to stay still, they just collaborated on an album with the Dub Pistols called Enter the Sound. I highly recommend you go check it out. You can find it on any streaming outlet. We get into Austin's origin story, the making of the anthems, arena touring with Lenny Kravitz. Let's get into it with the Freestylers, Austin Harvey. All right. Welcome to another episode of The DJ's Journey. My name is Deckard, and I am very pleased to have none other than the Freestylers' one and only Austin Harvey. Welcome.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Excited to talk through your history. You're one of my very, very early influences before I started DJing. So without any pause, we'll just jump right in and ask you what music was like for you growing up. What was music like in your household, and what were you listening to as a kid?
I mean, I think that's what I'd tell a lot of people. Like, your first kind of sort of introduction to music is what your parents listened to. And my dad was into like real rock and like 60s, 70s rock and roll, and I wasn't really into that. But my mum was really into cool music. I remember she had a Stevie Wonder album in the key of E, is it key? Yeah. And she had some like Bob Marley best of and some other stuff. And then I remember also sort of late 70s, there was those disco series called Stars on 45, that was it, which was like a mix. Some of it was like a mix of disco. It was like the first kind of mega mixes. So it was like a mix of all the big disco hits and also big funk hits as well, like up-tempo, clubby funk hits. It was called Stars on 45, and it was kind of edited. I didn't understand it. I just kind of liked the music. So, so I was kind of more into what my mum liked than my dad.
Right on. Well, yeah, my dad was listening to, God, I think, what was it? Like, it was more like 50s music, a Big Bopper, and
Bill Haley and the Comets or something like that.
Yeah. So what was, so you were just like Stevie Wonder. So this is what years? What's this?
Oh, this is sort of probably like late 70s, probably. But the first ever record I remember buying was two. There was we used to have this place called Woolworths, and they used to be the ones that sold the singles or the records. It was kind of before like all the big record shops. Like Woolworths was the place to go, and I think that's what they used to base like the national charts. If you go into Woolworths anyway. I remember buying Don't Stop the Music by Yarborough and People. And I like that record simply because at the end of the record is like this high pitched, sounds like Pinky and Perky sort of joining in on the chorus. So I kind of like that. And I was really young at the time. And also there was a group called Jury and the Blockheads, and they did a song called Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick. And I just liked the lyrics, so I didn't really comprehend music. I was really young. I just liked it. You just like these sounds.
Yeah.
But I remember they were the first records I really, really liked. But then I think because of parents weren't like, they didn't used to listen to music at home. It was more like in the cars. It was more like radio stuff. And I didn't really get into music really until I was like 13, 14 properly. with the whole birth of the whole kind of b-boy electro stuff. That's when
Right.
my journey into music really started. I mean,
It
I
seems to.
remember, I was saying, I remember like Rocksteady Crew that might have been slightly before that or around that time, but it was like kind of 1984 when I really started my musical journey.
I was just watching a video from Grandmaster Flash in 1983, and he was showing how to do different different phrase scratching, to like use the beat of
Yeah,
Billie Jean or something like that. It's interesting to me that so many were kind of along with like Simon Shackleton and Lee Coombs, and there seems to be like a commonality between a lot of you, and that American hip hop really jumped over very early, very early. Like I don't think I was in America, and I don't think I really started taking hip hop in until maybe like Beastie Boys and Run DMC. I went and bought their records on the same day when
right,
I was,
right,
I think
right.
I was 16, 1980, I think it was. So it's interesting to me that it jumped over the pond so early and was so
Oh
influential.
yeah, totally. I think, yeah, I think b-boy electro was like more popular like in Europe than it was than maybe the States. I mean, obviously it kind of came out from East Coast, like New York, I guess, and the Bronx, and you heard about these places, didn't know, you're a bit young at that time. It's not
Yeah.
like you can Google it then. There was nothing, there was no, you kind of had to look on an atlas, get a
Right.
look. Yeah, but they had like Roxy Crew had like a chart hit with Hey You Rocksteady Crew. So Herbie Hancock's Rocket was really big,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I remember it was about 12 years old at the time, and seeing like videos of this weird live show, but it looked like nothing I've ever seen in my life. Like it was completely like mind blowing
Yeah. I remember
for
that
that,
it had
and it
like
was like,
Herbie show had all the robot legs and everything. Yeah.
yeah, they had the robot legs and they had DST do it like with his at the time I think it was like the technology to have, I don't think it was Bluetooth, but it seemed like he didn't have a wire going into the mixer, so it
Right.
was like these
Right.
wireless headphones standing there really cool, just glass, just didn't really know what he's doing apart from just doing some sort of mad sounds, which
Yeah.
obviously was scratching. I think that was the first thing, but I remember because I used to go to a private school in England, and in private schools you come home like every other weekend, you have to stay at the school and stuff. I remember coming home for like a half term holiday, and my next door neighbor, my best friend, was playing this music in his yard in the front, and it was just like, what is this? And they were doing all this like mad dancing, and I obviously it was like breaking and popping and stuff, but I'd never seen it like in my face, and oh,
Right.
that was it. I was just hooked. And then on that period, like 40 odd years later, it's like I'm here still, from something that kind of just got into my system then, just took over. It's quite mad from a young age, at that young age, being
What
into.
Who else were you listening to at that time? What artists, what hip
Well,
hop artists
so
were
I
crossing
kind of,
over?
so I think the first tune I heard was like Renegades by Afrika Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Force.
Yeah.
And then I probably found some other records. So Looking for the Perfect Beat, Planet Rock. Then in England, we were very lucky because obviously buying import, I was probably at 14, 15 at the time, wasn't really buying the records. But someone had this idea to get all like the latest cool electro records and making compilation. And they did a series called Electro 1, 2, 3
Right.
by this guy called Morgan Khan. Started off this company called Street Sounds. He actually did the big concert. It was like the first big hip hop concert in about 1986, and all the artists that were on these records came and did a show at this big arena called Wembley Arena. They did an all
Oh
day
yeah.
there. I think that period was like a really important period, and that's when it all took off. And yes, like back to all these people you speak to, all the Brits that are still making music or were making music back in like the early 90s, were everyone would say we're all inspired by this period of music,
Right.
and sort of it's carried on throughout our lives really. being inspired by that music.
So did you get into breakdancing yourself? Were you kind of getting into the b-boy
Yeah, I used to
culture
do like
behind it?
break dances. Well, I've got my gilet on.
Oh, can you still do
Yeah, I
some?
could
You
do
got some robot
backflip.
moves, you know?
No, no. I was never that flex. I could do like the basic windmills, but then and I could do a bit of footwork and popping
Yeah.
and stuff. I used to go around with some friends of mine. They were like really good at it. So we had a little breakdance crew, and yeah, it was good fun. But I really enjoyed. I was like, yeah, I was a bit shy as well from the dancing. It was just like so, but I was really, really into the music. The music just took me. That was my thing, really.
Yeah. Very relatable.
That's
Very relatable. I was always more comfortable
and
behind the
then
decks.
yeah, and obviously, and then I was hearing these certain noises and scratching, and I wanted to know what it was, and then I wanted to do it, and it kind of
So at what point
transpired from
was
that,
that
really.
then where you kind of took the plunge from, like what
So
was that? Was there a particular time you
yeah,
remember?
well, what it was, I was like really, as I said, I was really into the music. I started buying records, only just bits and bobs. But then a friend of mine said about doing like discos, and I was saying, yeah, it'd be good to earn some extra pocket money to buy these records. So I was very fortunate. My mum took me to this record equipment shop, and I said, I want these decks, blah blah. And they would show me the decks that were just the all-in-one, the old school, like
Right.
2 decks, and the mixer it wasn't like how we know it for
Yeah.
turntables, turntable setup. And I said, no, I want the decks that the hip hop guys use, like that I've seen on Top of Pops. And they go, right. So they took me to the back of the shop, and there was this light beaming down on the deck, X1200, and it was like at the time it was like £250. So what's that? Back then it might have been like $400 with exchange
Yeah.
rate,
Yeah.
which probably in 1986 was a lot of money. I was thinking, what? Anyway, fast forward a few months later, I got a summer job. I think it was like, to get a summer job and we'll buy you this setup. So I got a summer job, and I was very fortunate. I was like the first one in my neighborhood to have the deck. So my friends would come over and we would jam at my house, and we were kind of emulating what we were hearing. I was buying the Ultimate Breaks and Beats albums, like 2 copies at a time. So I'd
Right.
scratch up all the famous breaks that just like emulating what we were hearing, and we recorded it on the cassette in my room. And then it kind of changed. I said, well, we should go and do this in a studio properly. And that's kind of when it all changed, really. That's when
Were you musical
my
otherwise?
music
Like,
career took off.
did you play any other instruments? Were you very music
Well, funnily
minded in
enough,
school?
I learned to play piano at the age of 8, because no one in my family were musical. It's quite hard to be inspired, and I was very lazy. And I remember having so many different teachers. I'd have a different teacher every year at school, because I'd learned piano at school. And instead of learning the pieces we were supposed to be learning, I'd just make stuff up.
Right.
And then at the age of 16, I stopped. I said, I don't want to do any more lessons. And then 2 years later, I ended up in the music industry. So whatever I learned helped, definitely. And obviously, I play better
Help
now
pave.
than
Yeah.
I ever really.
Paved the
So
way
yeah,
for coming up
so
with
it
chords
definitely
and things.
helped. I think it definitely, whatever subconsciously, it definitely helped. I understood about keys and sort of arrangements, and the basics, the rudimentals of music, which I
Yeah.
think is quite an important thing, which kind of nowadays is a bit lost.
Yeah, right, right. So when you were going from that beginning to dive in, I assume at some point, like when did you actually start playing out, or did you start like throwing your own parties, or did it just kind of
No,
grow?
yeah, around about I remember, yeah, when I was about 17 or 18, I started putting on some events. Like my next door neighbor owned a wine bar in the center of London, so it was a really good spot, and he gave it to us like on the cheap or free, I can't remember now. And we charged people at the door. He was happy because he had people coming in that weren't really normally coming in. And I did a few parties, and then I thought, oh, this is too much work. I just wanted to just DJ. I just wanted to turn up and just DJ. And then, but then what happened was that I got this job in working in, a job in a studio, and I didn't really have time to do these events. I was just always working.
Were you
Yeah,
like,
kind of
we did it
just,
starting off like as an kind of like an assistant, like just helping out wherever it needed help out, or what were you actually
well,
like
I mean,
working?
back then, the only way, well, back then it's like the only way of kind of learning. Oh yeah. So what happened was, so I started going to this studio, as I said, because I said, to my mates, let's go to the studio, record what we're doing properly. I didn't know what it was all about, but I found this studio in southeast London, a place called Brockley, and it was in a bedroom, and it didn't feel intimidating at all. It was in someone's house, and it just felt right. And they had loads of other people who went on to be successful. They're still quite successful nowadays. The guys themselves who owned the studio had some big hits in the early 90s. So it was a really good musical hub. So I was going there as a punter, and it turns out I was friends with randomly, I don't know how this guy was going out with a girlfriend, but I knew the brother, but they were from completely different opposite sides of London. Anyway, we kind of bonded on that. But this is when I was using the studio, and then I was at school doing my higher exams. I wasn't focusing. I just wanted to do music, and I said to them, "Look, I want to leave school," and they said, "Well, would you like to come and work for us?" I said, "Yeah." So I kind of end up working for these guys because I just knew trying to get into the learning the whole production side of thing was either, now that there wasn't a YouTube. There was either becoming a T-boy in a studio, because back then it was like big recording studios. There was so many bands, even if it was bands, it'd be solo acts in just big studios. The explosion of technology hadn't really taken off then. So it was either work as a T-boy in a studio, or kind of go to a college. There wasn't many musical colleges back then, or just somehow get lucky. But anyway, I got lucky and I started working in the studio. I learned how to use the equipment in my downtime. One of the guys showed me, and I kind of just played around with everything, and eventually you get better. The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Right. So did that lead up
Obviously,
to
music. I was going to say, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, musically, I definitely had some kind of aptitude. I had this like thing of, I knew what I wanted to achieve.
musical brain? Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely, that's what they liked about me. They definitely could see I had some kind of aptitude towards it. It wasn't just like chancing it. Oh shit.
Right. So that leads up to, if I have it right, Blaps Posse.
Yes. So that's, yeah. So basically, I was going to the studio when I was going as a punter to the studio. And the guy that kind of taught me, his name's Michael. Unfortunately, he's passed away quite a while ago now. He was engineering for these guys called Dynamic Governors, who went on to become Blaps Posse. Well, we formed Black Posse, and he was going there. I was hearing this music this guy Jason was doing, and it absolutely was blowing my mind. And I was, anyway, and then a couple of times this guy Mike couldn't do the sessions, and by then I was still up and coming and learning. But they put me in a studio with this guy Jason, and we got on really well. And then eventually we started working together, and because he came up with he had Dynamic Governors with somebody else, we started doing the name Blaps Posse, basically, because I think the label was Blaps. That he called the label Blaps Records. He was putting his Dynamic Governors music out on. So Blaps Posse was incorporating more of his mates and the crew. So yeah, and that's how that happened, really. So we met at this studio. It was called Noisegate Studios. It was owned by these guys called Double Trouble.
Yeah, Double Trouble. Right. Which was Rebel MC. That was kind of my.
That's right. Yeah.
That was one of my. In fact, I can't remember what year Rebel MC was, but because I was like suburbs white kid who liked pop music, alternative hip hop, and some of the music coming out of UK, was really interesting to me. I kind of missed out on that rave scene, both in the UK and US, other than what I just read about it. I wasn't cool enough to be going to like underground parties. It was just kind of out of my purview at that time until like later in the 90s. But what was that like for you then? So you starting to make music, and I assume
Yeah,
you're
well,
probably
that's so
going being.
yeah,
So yeah, so
I
what was that?
started
What was
making
that
music.
scene there? Yeah.
Well, it's like I started and it was around the whole birth of, kind of dance music culture,
Yeah.
because it totally exploded in the UK. And I was making these, early rave records, experimenting, acid noises, sped up hip hop, ravey sounds, like influenced by European noises. It's like a real that's the sound of rave, basically.
Right.
It was like
Right.
the influences from America, Europe, UK, using everything together and just creating this like mad collage of music for, and obviously it was up tempo. A lot of it was up tempo, so it's kind of made people dance more
Right.
than like slow hip
Yeah.
hop or something like that. That's why
Right.
we sped up the beats. A lot of times as well, it's like I tell people, like, the technology, it kind of, what happened was, like, the first sampler I was using, it had something like, it was like 8 seconds of sample. Like, you could sample one sample and you could get 8 seconds, or you could split it up and you could have two samples, 4 seconds, and so on. Yeah. So you'd get your import, because I always used to buy my hip hop records on import, much better quality. Plus you could put it at 45 because they were pressed at 33. And it sounded really mad, sped up. So you put these beats in, it was like +8 on the turntable to get the beat in, so it had enough time. So yeah, but I think people cotton on to that, and that's why it kind of took off, really. And obviously at the time, like 88, 89 was the birth of the whole like acid house, Chicago house sort of thing. So you had that music fused with what we were doing, so like housey sounds fused with like hip hop sounds, and again, yeah, that's what kind of was the birth
Were
of the
you
whole
were you? And sorry, I
rave
forget if you
thing.
already said. Were you in or around London at that time?
Yeah, I'm born and bred in London. Yeah. I was
Okay.
living in London. Yeah.
And then, so probably, and I guess around the time then that you came to form the Freestylers, was that also right in the time of that kind of Thatcher crackdown on raves as well?
No. Freestyles was like, we formed Freestyles around about the end of '86, myself and Matt. So there was a big period of, no, that
Wait,
was,
okay,
sorry, '96, sorry, not
96.
not
Yeah.
86, '96. Yeah, no, there was like, because the thing was, it was all the crackdowns was just due to health and safety. Thousands of people turning up, no ambulances, no police, no, as people get sick, what happens?
Yeah.
I mean, now, back then it was an illegal rave. Now they're called festivals.
Yeah.
There used to
Yeah.
be this massive rave organization called Rain Dance, and you'd turn up, and they'd have a huge, circus tent, thousands of people in there. They do it. The best ones were in summer because, mind you, UK weather can be a bit crap anyway, even in summer. But most times you've got it okay. Yeah, but now, I say nowadays it's called a festival. Back then it was an illegal rave.
Right. Yeah. And
But they
I
went,
just,
they eventually became legal. People realised, the sex. Like, I can't remember. Yeah, I think, if there was a lot of drugs around then, so a lot of people could be sick.
yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
remember much because it was a while ago, but yeah, I guess that's what it was. I think because it policed properly, there was no ambulance, there was no fire service.
Yeah. And
Health
I
and safety
remember
wasn't really.
seeing some articles like on NME or Melody Maker and showing these like pictures out on the countryside, Spiral Tribe or this or that, and talking about,
Yeah.
this party that's just like going on for days and they not leaving in farmers' property or something like that, So that does it makes sense to me how it had to evolve.
Yeah,
But so,
totally. I think the first,
oh, good.
I think the first real rave, like outdoor rave I went to people were parking on the freeway just to get to a field somewhere. You know, it was
Yeah.
highly illegal.
You know, people are going to want to party. They're going to want to celebrate. We know that. Tell me about your forming Freestylers with Matt, and what was your guys'
Okay,
kind of musical relationship like?
so yeah, so you know, so as you mentioned, I was making my first sort of production artist name was Black's Posse. Then I started working with various other people when I was programming and helping sort of other acts with their production. And I got signed to this label called Fresh Records, and Matt and Andy is Plump DJs. They had a group called Strike, and Strike had this big hit about '94 called You Sure Do. It's like massive everywhere. So, and then we were all signed to the same label, and it was a bit like a family. I didn't have a studio at the time, so I was using the studio owned by the record company, and they had one big setup and a small programming room. This is where we first started making the Freestylers records in, and got to meet Matt and Andy. Matt was a bit of a fan of my Black's Posse stuff. We started talking, and he said, "Oh, I'd like to do a record with you." One thing led to another, and we just started working on ideas together, and released our first ever release was called Drop the Boom. That's it.
Drop the Boom, yeah.
And we just released we put a white label, the record label, to the white label for us, and it did really well. And then we did an EP, and then that did well, and it kind of snowballed. And then we started making more and more tunes. And then we had a hit record, and a live band came together. It all kind of blew up all kind of very quick. And also the music that we were associated with was part of a scene called the Big Beat scene.
Yeah.
Although our music was
near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. Although our music was, I hate using the word, a bit more urban than what most people associate with the Big Beat thing. But we were sort of lumbered in that sort of pocket hole, you know, pigeonhole of being in the part of the Big Beat scene. But it was good because there was like loads of really good creative artists. It was good fun. It was something different. People kind of stopped liking house music at the time, and it was, you know, it was kind of quite a big thing. But we were just doing you know, we weren't doing it because we were you know, kind of calculated. We need to make this kind of music now. We just liked that music. I went back to making the music that I really enjoyed making, utilizing all the elements of the music I had been making to put into Freestylers, if that makes sense.
Right. No, well, and I'm not just saying this to butter you up, but We Rock Hard, your album that came out, I mean, from start to finish, it's a very on point. It all fits together really well, you know, B-Boy Stance and Roughneck and Don't Stop. And like you said, it fused those elements of hip hop, and you've got MCs on there. You've got, you know, some sirens, or that, you know, you've got a little club or rave sound. You've got a little hip hop sound. You've got, you know, big beats. It just really kind of came together, you know, right time, right place. And I just listened to the whole album, you know, a couple days ago, and you know, it still all just works. It still sounds great.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like, that album was a total blueprint for the music that I grew up listening to and loving, and trying to make similar music to the, you know, being inspired by all these amazing types of music and artists that we grew up listening to. And that all went into We Rock Hard, really. And obviously we're very lucky to work with Tenafly and Navigator to kind of gel the whole album together. They were the only, we worked with Soul Sonic Force, which was an amazing moment for us. That was through Arthur Baker, because we did a remix for Breaker's Revenge for him, and he kind of helped us getting hold of one of our early heroes, Soul Sonic Force.
Yeah.
So
what was that like?
That was the title track for the album.
As you and Matt were coming together and, you know, working on your ideas, what was that like? Did you consider yourself, like, were you DJing out a lot at that point, or were you more of a, you know, studio producer still?
Well, at the time, we were DJing out quite. Yeah, we were DJing. Matt was DJing a lot more than me. I don't know, just happened to be that way. But we were DJing out a lot, and at that time as well, I started doing. So what happened was the label Dave, who owned the label, he suggested, why don't you do this like as a live band? This will like somehow make it even bigger. So we kind of planned, how can we make a live band out of some electronic music with what we do? With experimenting, you know, it kind of worked. And there was a lot of people. There was about, I think there was about, at one stage, there must have been about 12 people touring. So I was doing a lot of the live band stuff. So we were doing like big festivals. We were doing club shows. We never got to do arenas because we weren't that big, but we were doing lots of club shows and festivals. And then we obviously got signed in America, and we were doing lots of touring over in America, where actually, when we actually toured Lenny Kravitz, we actually were doing arenas and big shows, but we weren't doing those as solo shows.
Right,
that was that was great. So yeah, Matt was doing more of the DJing because I was doing it on tour with the band.
Right. What was that like for you, going from I'm working in studios, slowly making your way up to now I'm sitting here formulating how to do a band, which seems pretty daunting, but it sounds like you just kind of went forward with it. I mean, did you find yourself sitting there opening for Lenny Kravitz, just going, I made it? Or what did it feel like?
It was all, I was just embraced it all, you know. Obviously I was a lot younger. I was just loving it. I was living my dream. It's like I wasn't even thinking about money. I think we lost loads of money anyway, but I wasn't even thinking about the money. I was just thinking, like, this is just the most amazing experience. I'm being paid to go and travel to America. I'm having fun. It's like one big, it's like you're like not really doing much, but just, and when you go on stage, it's like for half, well, the Lenny Kravitz show, I think we were only on stage for like half an hour, 40 minutes, but you know, it's just like this, like just mega fun. It was just brilliant. It was just, you know, touring around America and various other countries. It was just brilliant. As I said, I was just kind of just wrapped up in it, just enjoying the moment, really living for the moment.
One of my regrets is, I think it was in 2000, you were touring the US, 2000, 2001 maybe. And for whatever reason, I think you guys were in the Seattle area like on a Thursday night or something. And for whatever reason, I didn't go to the show. And all I heard about from friends who did go, like, they had B-boys and, you know, just, it was a whole show. And I was just like, I can't. So I still go back and, you know, like I look up some of your YouTube, you know, sets from some of that time to just, you know, see what your whole show was like that. And, you know, yeah, you guys were really, you know, a full outfit.
It was a proper full-on band experience. You know, I mean, as I said, I didn't even pay attention to how much it was costing because it comes out of your pocket. But I was just thinking, well, you know, you're doing a show, you've got to, like, you know, invest, and then maybe bigger things might happen. It's like all these big acts, like Deadmau5, when he first started off, I know he didn't even have a helmet, and then he made a little shitty helmet, and then you know, next thing you know, he's you know, he's got £1 million worth of lights and visuals and whatever, and you know, and he's getting paid, you know, and a lot of those acts that happens, but it never quite happened like that for us. But at least it was a really good show. Yeah, it was putting on a show. People just loved the break dancers, and it was just really mad seeing a live band, electronic live band, come out with break dancers. But you know, it was part of our heritage, so it was important. And I think what happened was in America, they really liked us because we were from the UK, we were from England. Our sound was very UK centric. Wasn't trying to be American. It was just like it was its own thing.
So, obviously, the influences, you were there, which I guess that was cool, is that you guys are.
Oh yeah, no,
you're giving it a fresh modern take.
That's what it was. Yeah, it's like kind of it was a complete twist on everything, our own take on it.
So you put out, Pressure Point came out, and a few years later you had Rosfuck, and you hit it huge with Push Up, that worldwide smash on that one, right? One thing that Rennie, you know, I was talking to Rennie last week and recorded a conversation to come out soon, and he noted, he said the same thing about you with like that early rave sound and, you know, sped up hip hop and et cetera. And he talked about kind of the I don't know, the wave of breakbeat, where you kind of ride the wave for a while, big beat, and then it kind of receded, and then there was he got another big hit or something, and he kind of brought it back again. And what was that like for you then, where you're doing the band and maybe not worrying about money? What was that like for you on the business side as you're becoming, a known artist and being established, and Fresca Nova Records, I believe you're a part of, right?
Well, no, that wasn't even our, no, so that Fresca Nova was not our label. That was nothing to do with us.
Okay.
We've never actually had a label as such in the past few years, but Fresca Nova was owned by this guy, Dave, who owned Fresh Records, Dave and his wife, Vicky. The Raw as Fuck album and the Adventures in Freestyle album came out on Against the Grain. That was owned by
That's right.
Crafty Cuts,
Crafty.
but really like this guy, Lloyd Seymour, who was School of Thought. And so, but we, I don't know, we kind of just wanted to make the music, someone else do their thing. And, so it kind of, it's like a Formula One team. Everyone has their, that's what the team, we make the music, someone else does that bit, someone else does that bit. But yeah, we to be honest, back in the day, we were never really managed properly. So as I said, it's just like, I didn't know what we were spending. I was just like, yeah. I don't think I ever saw a bill for it. I think someone said, like just flippantly, oh, it's going to cost X. And I said, yeah, all right. It's just like, whatever, I didn't really think about the consequences.
Right.
Not that there's been mega consequences, but it's like, because it's not like it was worth it because it was a little bit of a success. So it wasn't a total disaster.
Right. Well, it's always got to be a little bit tougher, it seems like, on the breakbeat side versus like house or something, like the.
Yeah, no, totally. Somehow freestyle, like a lot of, obviously there's that, a lot of people get confused when I say my artist name is Freestylers, and they go, oh, I love that record for Freestyler. I said, no, that's by these guys called Bomb Funk MC. Now that's been the bane of my life since they ever released that record. But the thing is, I don't know, somehow, because we have had chart hit out of all the breaks artists that are still going, we're the only ones who had chart hits back in the, from like B-Boy Stance, Roughneck, and obviously Push Up, and then more recently, Cracks. Although it's like a massive underground hit, it's it's still millions of hits. I know it was a remix someone did, but that did really well. But somehow we're sort of beating on the fence, so a lot more people kind of know us. I mean, I turn up some places not knowing. I think, how's anyone going to know who we are? And then it turns out people know who we are. So
Yeah,
obviously done something right. Yeah. So it's we seem to have, I guess, be at the top of what we're doing,
and
even
you
though
also
it's like a small scene.
right. Well, and I have to imagine, when you get a hit like Push Up, I imagine that has to kind of raise you guys up for a while in terms of bookings and things like that.
Yeah,
Like
totally. Yeah,
worldwide, I
like
assume.
loads of shows, doing like maybe even sort of more mainstream stuff. Which is good. I enjoy doing the mainstream stuff. Can't shy away from it. And just was really, really during that period doing like these big, like we won some awards. Like there's it doesn't exist anymore, but in Holland or Belgium, they had the equivalent of MTV and it was called TMF. And we did this huge awards ceremony, which we won a couple of awards at, so like, that's to go off and say something stupid, whatever, be like a proper rock and roll star. So that it was good fun. As I said, it's good fun. So I guess I've been lucky in that respect. I've had records that have crossed over and have been used in like pretty successful movies like Zoolander. Zoolander is one of those classic comedies, still gets played.
Yeah.
It'll still be played in many years to come. So I've had tracks and commercials and stuff being used, so it's as I said, we've been lucky that we've been able to stay up as high as possible for what we're doing.
And on the creative side, did you find your sound has evolved and changed over time? I assume, I take it that's probably just a natural process of just your own, what you're interested in as an artist.
you just want to push yourself. Although I do find I do go back and do a lot of. People say like, why don't you do that? I like that. You can't always just do what you know. You can't always just please. You know that expression. You can please some people some of the time, or can't
Yeah.
please everyone
Yeah.
all the time. So, but the last album we did, Other Worlds, was kind of a throwback to kind of We Rock Hard and the Raw as Fuck album, the best, you know, the two most successful albums of ours. You know, it really stuck. You know, a lot of people really feeling it. Our old fan base really liked it. So that kind of was good that we kind of nailed the old sound. But yeah, you're trying to push yourself. Technology has moved on. I mean, I actually still use. I'm not afraid to say it. But I actually still use Logic 9 on an old G4. And like, I know that's for using Logic X, but like, I've got so used to it. I just don't want to, you know, it's just like, I'm going to do the same stuff on the new Logic than I'm going to do that I can do now.
Right.
I mean, I have used Logic X and it's just, you know, newer plugins and newer this, that and the other. But I don't know. Sometimes, you know, I think of doing music it's like you're painting, and that's my easel, and that's my own. No, I'm not trying to, and then I can't copy anyone. You know, I'm not. I'm trying to be original as far as I can be. With and that gives me my own sound as well, I guess. Yeah,
Well,
which
I
is
think
the most
there's
important
something.
thing. Finding your own.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say getting your own signature sound is the hardest thing in music, because what's going to differentiate you from this person to that person? If you're a vocalist, it's generally your tone in your voice, plus you're going to work hopefully with some good producers and have some good songs, but that's what distinguishes you, is your tone. But as a producer making dance music, it differentiates you from what makes us different from the Chemical Brothers or the Project. Everyone has their own sound, that's they do, and that's the hardest thing to get. So when you have got it, it's good to stick with it.
Right. You made me think about watching Fatboy Slim with his old setup. He went. I don't know how. This is
Yeah,
probably.
exactly.
But he loaded up the old thing. He said, he goes, we were so constrained by the technical aspects of it, just like you said, you could only sample for so long and you had so many limitations, but it really pushed you to figure out how to make the most of it and how to, I don't know, fine tune it, rather than sort of like, hey, I've got everything at my disposal here technology wise.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, back, we were mentioning about the Blacks Posse. I remember so we had this track called, I think it was Bust It or Don't Hold Back. And we'd run out, it was only like 8 channels, the cassette, the reel to reel. So we had to do the scratching live onto the mix down. So there's quite a few takes. And it's just genius. And counting the bars on because you didn't really have, you couldn't arrange it like you can now, like on the computer. From what I remember, it was just loops. So you had your beats and your bass, and you'd be counting bars and doing the mutes on the mixing desk. But it
Right.
kind of had its own vibe,
And introduced, I guess, some human elements to it too. You probably had some little.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Well, yeah, a lot of music nowadays is just made a bit robotically, I think.
Right. And so, and have you, Matt, stayed together through all this time?
Yeah, we're still talking.
Yeah, still time.
Yeah, we're still Matt. Yeah, we're still on good terms. Matt, quite a long time ago, he's like a full-time psychologist though, and sort of doesn't do that much music. And actually, there's going to be a new Freestylers album out next year in March, which is a collaboration between Freestylers and Dub Pistols. Matt actually didn't work on that album. It's just me and Barry from Dub Pistols.
Yeah.
Because what happened was I produced on his last album. I produced like 5 tracks for their last album, and we're kind of managed by the same person. And he said, "Well, why don't you just do an album together?" So that's how that came about. I'm really excited about this new album. I think it's a proper like throwback to, I don't know. Again, I think it's the best album we've done since the first, like Raw as Fuck or We Rock Hard. It's better than the last album we did. There's a lot more reggae elements. Obviously, Dub Pistols, a lot of reggae art elements, but it was great to work. We've got some great artists on there, some well-known reggae artists featured on the new album. But yeah, but Matt wasn't actually involved in this album. But then also we've done this we started this other project quite a few years ago called Pirate Jams, which is kind of like 90s rave and house and something like along those lines. And we have had a few releases, and we've actually done an album under name Pirate Jams, which we're waiting for to come out. So he was involved in that, but
I know I have at least one of those Pirate Jam records. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there's
an album coming out.
Awesome. Is that album with Barry? Is that going out under Freestylers, or is that going out under a different collaboration?
Yeah, well, it's Dub Pistols and Freestylers album. That's the artist on it. Dub Pistols and Freestylers.
All right.
And it's going to The Sound
in March. All right. Well, you're giving us a big heads up on that. So yeah, that's definitely exciting.
Well, it's going to be starting. They're going to be starting to do promo on it very soon. Barry does a festival every year called Mucky Weekender. It was just this week, and we did posters for the artwork of the album and like a barcode so people can pre-order. So they're going to be starting doing the whole pre-order process. We've got our first single being released, I believe, like the 10th of October from the album.
Awesome. Amazing. All right. Well, we'll definitely be. And Barry is the one. He's always been on my radar as well. Been a big fan of Dub Pistols for a long time. So Barry, if you're listening, I'd like to have you on the show as well. So
I can fix it for you.
Can you fix it for me? All right. I would love that. I'd love that. So I'm curious too then. So were you part of, I mean, from being in Seattle, which was not really big in electronic music, we could get some artists coming through. They're pretty big for house music. And obviously there's a big alternative scene there. And I was always just fascinated and kind of couldn't believe like how much talent you had all together there, not just in London but in the UK. So many breaks artists and Canada and Australia also seem to have a bunch. So for you, what was that scene like, for you as you were getting into be the freestylers? And I mean, was it kind of a community thing, or what was that like?
Yeah, it's definitely a community thing. And that's the nicest thing about it, actually, when a lot of people start getting on your same vibe and making music similar to you, and you're DJing at these venues and you're seeing them here and there every now and again. That's the best thing. It's like a bit of a family vibe. You're happy to see people. The thing is, we go to one place where the music is really massive is in Spain. We go to southern Spain loads. I mean, doing a show this weekend. It's like my 7th time this year in Spain. They absolutely go wild for breaks there. It's just mad, and it's been going like this for a long time. Like a good it's about 2000. Nearly 20 years of going there. And since COVID happened, the parties have got even bigger and better there. It's like mad. There's like thousands of young kids, because for me, I've always said it's really important you get young people into your music, because then hopefully they will make it and they'll make a scene for themselves, which then makes the, kind of revitalizes anything, and they have a take on the sound, which is what happened in Spain, because we were going there, but the people weren't making the music, or the music wasn't that great, and they were just learning. Now they're like smashing it. There's some really amazing, talented Spanish producers. And it's just like an amazingly vibrant scene, and a lot of young people go to these parties and they absolutely love the music. There's an old school crowd there. I mean, that's the one reason why drum and bass has always been very popular especially in the UK, because there's been many generations
of the audience,
young audience. Yeah, that's it. It's just like handed down. Okay, and the next lot, and the next lot, and the next lot. A lot of the names that were big, Groove Rider and Fabio are still going, Adam F, all that lot,
Aphrodite,
the Aphrodite, and obviously then you got, the super groups like Pendulum and Sub Focus. They've been going a long time and they're still going. So
Chase and Status having a huge year last year,
Chase
playing
Status,
Coachella and all that.
Yeah, I think freestylers, what we did was a precursor to what they've been able to do. You know, sometimes if you're too ahead of the game, it's no good. You know, like they say, oh, you're a pioneer. Pioneers don't, you get the props, but you don't get the funds, you know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah. It
you
didn't
kind of
always work
set the
out great.
foundation. Yeah. You set the foundations for something, but you know, it is what it is.
Do you find you play different? Because one thing that Rennie mentioned about Spain was similar to you. You know, he said the gray scene, but he said the promoters or someone always they want it to be about 140 BPM. They like it fast.
Yeah,
Do
that's
you
it.
do
Yeah.
you find
Retro.
that
They
as
go
well?
retro, play retro, play retro, play retro. So you got to play records from 2005. Yeah, they like it fast and furious. It's like, yeah, there's a specific sound. And if you kind of go off it, it's like, well, they don't like, but they're quite, can be a bit aggy, but as long as you
Right.
stick to the plan, it's okay.
Start
The
to lose the
maddest thing
dance
is
floor a
though
little bit.
about Spain. Well, the weirdest thing about Spain is that you'll be playing something and they'll go absolutely mental for about 2 minutes, and then they kind of used all that energy up and they're waiting for the next big moment. So they might be
Right.
bopping around for 5 minutes until the next big moment happens. And that's how it is. They don't dance continuously for, you know, they just go absolutely mental for about a minute, 2 minutes, just
Right.
jumping up and down and going crazy. And then they'll kind of chill out. And as I said, they'll
Yeah.
wait for the next moment, you know.
Did you have other areas where your sound either you were surprised it went over as well, or like, you know, let's say Ibiza, you know, like does breakbeat,
Well,
you know, work in Ibiza?
Breaks has never really played. I mean, when Ibiza Rocks first started off, my good friend Eddie Temple Morris, used to be on MTV, then went to XFM. He was doing an alternative room, the back room at Privilege, which was like the big club. It's now called Universe or something. They reopened it. And he was doing alternative music in the back room at this huge club, Privilege, which went on to become, I think, what do I say? I lost it now. What's it
Universe,
called?
is that what you just said?
No. The night went on and became something else, and then they opened up a hotel. I can't remember anyway. But it was for alternative music, like alternative. We did a few nights there, but that's it. Ibiza's always been house, really.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
drum and bass parties, but yeah, Ibiza is mainly house. In saying that, I did play. There's someone that does this event called Step Back, which they do a lot of like old school classic nights there. They have a lot of the old school rave DJs, and lots of older generation people come over to the island for like a week of partying. But this good friend of mine, Graham Gold, he's involved with a club night called Peach, and that used to be a massive trance night. But there's a guy called Darren Pierce that used to play like breaks, and he sort of fell out for a time. And I'm good friends with Graham, and he said, "Yeah, I want you to be the resident breaks DJ." So when I played it, I really enjoy it because I can't play all my reggae. I have to kind of, it's like a more houseier sound to like breaks I play. Somehow I managed to pull it off every time.
Right.
So, and it works. Again, like I played this event called Jungle Experience in Koh Phangan in Thailand, and it was out of season, but normally they just have, you know, it's like house DJs, tech house, or whatever, just fall to the floor. But somehow like 1,200 people turned up. This was in June, and I was doing my, you know, it wasn't just turn up for me, but like I had them going for it. It was a really amazing event, and I was playing sort of like the breaks that kind of they might understand. So it's
Yeah.
a kind of good challenge. I mean, I like to, you kind of have to adapt, but also I'm not afraid to play something. You know, I'm not afraid of like people aren't dancing, panic. You know,
Right.
I don't worry. You know, you can get by, or like I like to. Otherwise, how does anyone find out new music, or how do you know if you've done something good or not? You know, it's just like, and then sometimes, as you know, you make a piece of music and it just goes over people's heads, and then sometimes you play it, and then more people, it gets released, more people get into it, and then there's a bit of a slower build up. A lot of times, sometimes you can play as a DJ, you want to play your tune out, have an instant experience, instant rewind, you know what I mean? But it doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah.
So, or, get a woo.
Yeah.
Sometimes that doesn't happen, the instant feedback. But yeah, no, and so I do kind of just, so like going to Spain this weekend, we're actually doing a King of the Beats set, which is King of the Beats is me, freestyles, Craft Cuts and Plum DJs. We've been doing these sets, and it's a good bit of hype, 3 big names all in one, with back to back. So we're doing this party in Spain next Saturday as King of the Beats, and
Awesome,
we'll
great.
adjust our set.
And are you like tag teaming then? Each of you play like a couple tracks, or you go like a little bit longer? And
Yeah,
then
we
trade
do.
off, or-
Yeah, something play normally like 1 on, 1 off, or 2. Yeah, something like that. We kind
Yeah.
of talk about what we're going to play. It's not random. We have a kind of pre-plan. We spend some time planning it out. Yeah, you go in Spain. In Spain you can't play a set like you play in England. In UK and some other countries like Australia, they like a bit of piano. High as in the air piano. In Spain, they don't really like it. They just like
No.
it hard, just furious.
Right. I had a little taste of that, not in Spain, but I went to Portugal to play. Somebody,
Okay.
brought me out to play, and I was playing what I just kind of thought would be good Portugal
Yeah.
beach music. Somebody came over and said, "You can play harder," and I was just kind of like, "Oh, okay, all right, unfiltered, let it
Yeah,
go."
that's always a good sign. Yeah,
Yeah. But
that's
it's
always
better
a
than
good sign.
it's better than being told the other way. Like, hey, could you tone it down a little bit?
That's it. You're playing shit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not digging it. And I was thinking too about how cyclical music is, and just as when you were putting out We Rock Hard, you were actually taking these sounds, influences, and electro and hip hop and things that you had been taking in the 80s. And one of my favorite eras of music was I remember going to Winter Music Conference in 2006.
Okay.
That was right when kind of Electro Clash had been out, and it was kind of just turning into electro.
Yeah.
And hearing
Yeah.
Steve Lawler bring all of the what used to be progressive, but now it was like kind of take out some of the trancey elements, add this fat bass lines, and big kicks to it, and still have a little atmosphere, but it was really just way more gripping. And that kind of sound came after tribal and dark drums. It's funny because this year I've been hearing a lot more tribal again, and I'm like, oh, we're doing this again, huh? But in my head, I'm going, well, maybe if tribal's coming back, maybe electro is about ready to make another, like reintroduction again at some point, as it is all cyclical.
Yeah. Music is cyclical, but I don't know. I mean, yeah, trend. It's all trend. Somebody make a record, and everyone wants to make a record similar to that. It's like when the disco cut up came out, Eric Pridge did Call on Me, and then like about 2,000 records came out. Right, what disco record can I nick? And just do a loop. People catch on to it. Oh, this sounds a good idea, and let's do our own take on it.
Which at the end, then like with Big Beat, which I dearly loved, and that was one of my big influences early on. But it did get a little reductive after a while. It felt like here's another song taking a similar sample.
I think it's like the one thing about like house music, drum and bass, it's very exposed either on underground radio stations or internet. Breaks it's got a very, very small outlet, and if it is like I know, like for example, like Bicep. Now their biggest tune is not a 4/4 record. It has a break. I call their music like it's not break. I call it like the kind of generic the generic word Americans use is electronica or electronic music, rather than, and that's how I describe it. It's not the music we make and play isn't very exposed. Like no one, it's very niche. So that's why again it's like, well, is it going to be cyclical? I've got no idea.
Right.
People are using it, like I know there's a lot of speed garage being remade now, but like an up-to-date version, and a lot of young people put like a breakbeat in it, like on the breakdown. So, but it's not, yeah, it's not breakbeat music as such. So,
Right. Well, yeah, and I always felt like breakbeat, I would describe it to anybody who was maybe a more house music and didn't fully understand breakbeat. I said, house is the one where it's always kind of inviting you. It's kind of, it's nice, it's warmer. It's the like, hey, come on and join. And breakbeat was a little more like maybe you have to work for it a little bit to find it or to find your into
that's
it.
it. Yeah. I think as well, because I've noticed trends, people dancing, like with house music, don't really, people do dance, but a lot of, like you see these videos of just people holding up cameras to the big name
Yeah.
DJ. They don't even dance. With breakbeat, you have to, if you're going to dance, you really have to kind of
Yeah.
throw some shapes. You really
Yeah.
have to move. It's a kind of high energy music. Drum and bass, although it's a high energy music, you like kind of dancing. You can do it at half time, so it's not like not frenetic. You're not frantically dancing. So I think, and again, that's why I think maybe dubstep was really popular because people could just mosh. They didn't have to
Right.
do much. You could just
Right.
nod your head, and that would be sufficient. You didn't really have to dance. It's one form of dance music that if you're going to dance to it, you really have to dance to it.
Right.
Use
Right.
up your energy.
Yeah, no, agreed. And same thing with drum and bass, I guess too. It's like although I think what I would see with drum and bass that I always thought was interesting in the US anyway was, the kind of common uniform back in the 2000s. And, you'd see like a guy with like a baseball hat and a hoodie kind of hanging out near the sides, and then kind of like what you were saying, he'd put some dance moves for a couple minutes and then stop, and then kind of on repeat. So it's interesting to me, because to me, I guess, I always thought breakbeat seemed a little more mainstream, if you want to call it that, than drum and bass. But it seems like drum and bass is kind of, like you said, kind of having its day a little bit more than breakbeat currently.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Maybe in America, I don't know. On like a lot of commercials, you do get like a break in a in the piece of music. So just people just don't recognize it. They don't click.
As its own
And,
genre. Yeah.
people just follow what their friend. A lot of people just follow what their friends do. So I mean, Vegas. Like I know Vegas is not really to be judged, but it's Vegas is like the Ibiza of America, right? So it's
Yeah.
like people just go along to these big parties, have these big, I guess they have maybe some underground, but it's generally like the big commercial name artists that they're paying shit tons of money to
Yeah.
to just feed that commercial crowd that want to spend, $1,000 on a bottle of champagne.
Yeah. Yes, with drones that come out with sparklers and et cetera. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you maybe about if there was just kind of going back again a little bit. Do you have any anecdotes about making of some of your early songs? And when working with Tenderfly or Navigator or Soulsonic Force.
One anecdote with Tenderfly, I remember when we were so a friend of Matt's had a studio in this area, Hoxton, it's like a trendy part of London, and we were doing the track on the Pressure Point album, London Sound, and Tenderfly turned up to do his vocals for it, and he just couldn't get in time with the beat. It's because he was drunk, so it's taken to a fish and chip shop to like sober him up, and then eventually, after a couple of hours, he was all right. I don't know what happened there, but yeah, normally he was okay, but I think he drunk too many Tennents at the time. Tennents is a beer. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
Tennents.
No,
The
I don't think
Tennents,
so.
yeah, it's like
One too many.
it's like the kind of it's a kind of in a can, and it's like it's kind of associated with down and out people drinking this stuff. Super tea. I don't even know if it exists. I've never drunk it in my life. I don't even know if it still exists. Maybe it does.
Did you make the song, or were you making
feel,
beats with the idea of having vocals over them, or was it just kind of this collaborative?
well,
like,
initially,
we'll play you some different things we're working on and see what you might be able to do vocals on.
well, when I don't know. I mean, when I did B-Boy Stance, I found I had the reggae loop, the bass line loop, and obviously I just wanted some people in the Big Beat, they were just using samples, and I knew Tenafly from working Rebel MC, and I said to myself, I can get this guy called Tenafly, and that's how that sort of happened. And I knew his manager, so it kind of went from there. And also I knew Navigator from the rave scene. So initially, actually, so the backing track for Roughneck originally was going to be, we did a remix for some band, and we thought that what was eventually Roughneck was too good to give away for this remix. We need to make that our own song. And then we tried a few different people, and then I don't know, like Navigator was just emceeing for us, and we thought, we didn't seem to think, oh, ask him to do the vocal, you know, and he came up with the goods for that. What else? I remember, you know, when we were, you know, I mentioned like touring with Lenny Kravitz. The first show he did was in a part of this. It was when he was doing his American Woman tour. We did the first show was in Minneapolis, and I was standing to the side of the stage. I see someone walking around, look like, I don't know if you know curtain nets. Do you have curtain nets in the like in, I don't know, in England they don't have them anymore, I don't think. Like, used to have these nets that go behind the curtains of your house, yeah, like these horrible, like, really, it looked creepy. Anyway, and I see this person look like anyway, and then I saw from the side, it turned out it was Prince. And when and basically, yeah, it was so they went on to, when they did the encore, they came on, and I saw him at the back, because I was on the side of the stage at the back sort of thing. I saw Lenny showing Prince, you know, like they went on and did Are You Going My Way? And I saw him chatting to Prince about whatever. Yeah, oh my God, the crowd went absolutely insane. Prince and Lenny Kravitz performing that song. That was pretty cool. I didn't get to meet Prince, but I saw him.
That's a highlight though.
We actually the funniest, touring America, we had some mad moments because we were like doing a lot of touring on tour buses. We did a lot of these festivals. Like we were like when we were touring with Lenny Kravitz, we were hanging out with Smash Mouth. So I got quite friendly with them lot. Then we did when we did this tour in Australia called Big Day Out Tour, which was like a massive tour, and all the band. I got to meet Beastie Boys, and they were my heroes. And I was like hanging out with System of a Down. I got friendly with the guy, Sir. I don't know if he probably wouldn't remember me now, but on that tour, we were like quite pally, and like we just chat to each other. I actually went to just after when they were doing a show in London. Oh, this is like 2005 now, so, and they invited me along backstage to watch that. But yeah, I don't know, I was just hanging out with all these different people, and then we did I don't know if it still goes on, but he did a show called Weenie Roast, which is a big like rock and roll show down in Irving. Yeah, for
that
K
sounds
Rock.
like,
so there was like
K-Rock,
loads
so,
of there was loads of celebrities hanging around, porn stars and what have you, like just hanging around. Yeah.
One of
Actually,
those.
I never really met them, but the guys who were breakdancing for us, they became really good friends with Black Eyed Peas before they became really mega famous. Black Eyed Peas,
Right.
Before their big hits. There was a girl that one of the breakdancers started dating, and she was sort of looking up. This was before they were like really, you know, before they were like popular, but back in the 1990s, they were just an underground act. They weren't like a commercial act, were they? So yeah, lots of stories. Yeah, so lots of various things have happened. They still happen.
I can see it in your eyes, like, oh boy, some of these are probably stories I don't want to say on the mic.
Yeah. No real actually there's one, the only real disaster I've had DJing was once I was playing, a friend of mine, he's got his brother to put me in this place called Cheltenham. It's near Oxford, some town, and I was playing CDs. So it's probably looking about 2000 and I think it's about 2008, 9. I was still like, USB sticks hadn't quite sort of taken over yet. And they had the DJ booth, and the DJ booth was like kind of a bit curved, and in front of the DJ booth there was like this glass screen, and the decks were like a kind of an angle, and to the left of me was a lighting guy with a big lighting desk, and so I'm playing the tunes, and I'm looking through my CD case to the side, and then suddenly I hear the sound kind of dip in volume, and the club was packed at the time. I thought this is a bit weird. This is all happening very quick, by the way, but obviously the way I'm describing it, it's like probably sounds a bit slow. And then I turn around and I see the fader has kind of the up fader has kind of come down a bit. I thought, well, maybe it's the vibration to the music. So put it back up, and then I turn around still looking for the CD, and the same thing happened again. I hear the volume go down. I think this is weird. Anyway, so I put it back up. Then third time, like, out of the corner of my eye, I see this hand coming over the top of this glass screen, like touching like the fader. So I turn around, and there's this girl, and she's like completely like wasted, and she's trying to grab the mixer, and I pushed her hand away, and then she's like really trying to grab it, and then she starts going like, fuck you, and then I just thought nothing, and then I'm like looking for the security are never around when you need them.
Right.
Anyway, I just wanted to get, because this girl was drunk. I'm looking for security, and I've turned around, and all of a sudden I've seen like a tidal wave of liquid come over this glass thing. It's gone all over the decks, the mixer, all over the lighting guy. Like sparks are flying. Just the music. This girl had thrown a jug of gin and tonic over everything. The music started. I was just drenched in this, sweet, sickly liquid. Anyway, that's probably the worst disaster. Oh no, and there's been another time. It's always in that area. And there's once played in Oxford. I remember playing at like some like Oxford Union Ball, or not. I don't know. Anyway, and at the time I was playing vinyls. That's even longer. I remember, and they didn't even. They had a stage was about that high, so it wasn't even like a stage as such. And I was looking through my records, going through the box. All of a sudden, I hear the needle go skate across the turn around. There's two guys smashing the shit, trying to have a go at each other on the decks. They've just pushed over the deck. Oh, it's just, and then again, security are never around when you need them. That's the kind of only disasters as such. But yeah.
Well, neither is your fault. You can kind of do your hands in the air and say, "What can we do?" So, and sorry, did you say? Do you still play vinyl gigs every once in a while? What do you say, like Spain? Do you play old songs, or do you ever play? No.
No, I haven't played. The last time I did a vinyl set, I don't know if they do it in the States, but do you have that record shop day? A friend of mine was working in a record shop, and he got me up there. It was good. It was a good. I enjoyed it because DJing and vinyl is a lot harder than CDJ. It is. I'm not really one of these where you can DJ on vinyl. There was plenty of shit DJs on vinyl.
Oh yeah.
It's not what you play. It's not what format you use. It's what you play. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like.
Well, we just had a party here recently I went to that was all vinyl, and DJ Dan and Sneak and Doc Martin and Mark Farina. It was cool to hear. There's some of that stuff they're playing. I was less into house at the time. I was more into like kind of Sasha Digweed style or Fatboy Slim style. But that was pretty cool to hear some of those like Express 2 and some of these old songs on a proper sound system with vinyl.
I've got all that on. Yeah, I've got all that on vinyl. A lot of the music that I've got on vinyl, never converted to
haven't digitized it
or digital. I've never digitalized it. So I could easily do it. And as I said, it's a good challenge because you really have to go through the music properly. All right, I'm going to play that and test it out, and you have to spend a couple of days preparing for it.
Yeah.
So rather than I'm just going to look at my computer and be like, oh right, okay, it's a lot. Yeah, it's a bit more preparation. But then obviously the actual mixing aspect of it and keeping it in time. And yeah, it's I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it.
Well, yeah, and always will appreciate the music from that time for sure. Aston, I've loved having you on. I think we covered it. I think we covered it, and it's been a pleasure having you on and going over your music history. I'm very much looking forward to the work you do with Dub Pistols. What was the name of it going to be again?
The album's going to be called, well, it is called Enter the Sound.
Enter the Sound. All right, and next March 2026.
Like Enter the Dragon, Enter the Sound.
Enter the Sound. I love it. I love it. All right, thank you very much, and we will talk again soon.